in trying to determine what led to the canceled summit, you've pointed out that it goes back to mid-April when a private channel of negotiations was made public. So explain to us why the leak of Mike Pompeo making this visit to North Korea have led to the collapse of these discussions.
It's great to be with you, Scarlet. And the reason is because right now we're witnessing in full public view that the pressure of this summit was too much for both Kim Jong Un and President Trump. These are sensitive diplomatic talks. The United States and North Korea for decades have been looking at each other through a variety of threats and engaging in rhetoric that is very damaging. So when a private channel was established between then CIA Director Pompeo and the North, that was an opportunity to really hammer out these tough issues behind the scenes. But the leak occurred. The president publicly announced that Secretary Pompeo was meeting, largely, I believe, to improve his standing in the United States Senate when he was going for Senate confirmation, and it was very, very contentious. But the cost now is that we have no private channel with North Korea, and so we've seen the public pressure being too much and the collapse now of these talks, which is very regrettable.
So talk a little bit more about that private channel. Does diplomacy need to be private and at least discreet in order to work? Are there any instances where it can be conducted out in the open and be effective as well?
Well, it certainly should be conducted out in the open at the appropriate time. The problem here is that the United States and North Korea have never found the appropriate time. It has been more than a decade since we really engaged effectively with North Korea in any manner of getting some type of engagement and concession. So this needed a private channel. The public bombast between President Trump and Kim Jong Un related to fire and fury and President Trump's speech at the United Nations and visceral language coming from North Korea, it was just too much for any diplomatic process. So when Secretary Pompeo opened up that channel, he was making progress with the support of South Korea. And it's unfortunate that that got truncated. I'll add as well that in the case of Iran, there was private diplomacy for a significant amount of time before the United States engaged in a more public discussion, but we never engaged in tit-for-tat publicly where we could then get into a position like we are now with North Korea, with it all collapsing in front of us.
Joel, what do you believe was the exact catalyst for President Trump writing this letter? And did it have to do with North Korea calling Vice President Pence a political dummy?
Certainly the letter was stunning. The letter was not a tweet. It was not what we have in many ways come to expect from the president. He wrote a full letter, but it was a stream of consciousness letter, and certainly it looks like it came on the heels of the insults, which goes to the point of having this all hashed out in private. These public insults, they do no good, and National Security Advisor Bolton actually laid, in many ways, a trap for the North Koreans about 2 weeks ago when he publicly said that he wanted to use the Libya model for North Korea, which is very aggressive language for the North Koreans. They don't view Libya as a successful model for their survival. So that is when we started to see the unwinding of the public debate and the public discourse. And President Trump clearly feels like he needed to get more leverage in this discussion. He needed to try to reposition it, that it was in the North's interest to have these talks. And this letter, it's very aggressive in tone. It may not get the result that he's looking for.
Putting aside the trade of those barbs, what do you think the role of China is in this? Because President Trump did indicate that prior to the meeting between Kim Jong Un and President Xi of China on May 8th, that the movement toward the summit was positive. But then it sounds as though there was a little bit of a roadblock there. What do you make of that?
So China's role has always been the central question that each successive American administration has wanted to unlock, which is how to move China to push North Korea to the negotiating table to ultimately give up its nuclear weapons and to change its behavior. China has significant control and authority in Pyongyang. It can make an impact. The danger now is that China will look at this, and if Kim Jong Un takes the high road, in a sense, and says, look, I didn't break the diplomacy. President Trump called off the summit. He might be able to peel China away from American efforts to have China isolate North Korea and put sanctions onto North Korea that have had an impact. And that could be very damaging for our ability to essentially get a diplomatic arrangement and a deal with North Korea that would stick. And so right now, President Trump has handed a potential diplomatic gift to Kim Jong Un, and for China, they're the target. What will Kim Jong Un do? Will he try to peel China off, or will he respond with bombast? In which case, then China will be in a very hard-pressed position to lighten its pressure.
Joel, we introduced you as a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, so you have a sense of how things work in Foggy Bottom. How does Secretary Mike Pompeo go about rebuilding trust, not just with North Korea, but with China as well? What are they doing in Foggy Bottom right now?
Well, right now, his first call has got to be to the South Korean president, who was just in Washington a day prior to this announcement and was not given any advance warning that the United States would not come to the summit. You know, this has been a real feat of South Korean diplomacy, if anyone. They have worked very hard because it's their country on the line. They're the ones in the gun sights, so to speak, literally, of North Korea if a military conflict takes root. So South Korea, we need to repair relations right now because they're looking very, very much abandoned by the United States. After that, the calls to Japan, the calls to China to try to stay on message. And it's been very difficult for this administration, as we've seen with Advisor Bolton, with the Vice President, with President Trump, not all speaking in the same way as Secretary Pompeo. He's got to both externally reassure our allies and internally get everybody in this administration to say the same thing. That is a very tall order.